Right, our senior reporter Dasen Thathiah has been out and about since last night, actually. He joins us now live. Dasen, so you had an aerial view a short while ago of the situation in Durban, eThekwini in particular. Just tell us what you've seen and just how widespread the damage is.
Well, Shahan, what I've seen is certainly something I haven't seen before, well, at least not here in Durban. We spent the afternoon flying from the north side of the city all the way down to the south, and we also covered a few areas in between. And I can tell you that the damage is absolutely extensive. You really get a sense of it when you're up in the air. You see why certain things have happened. You actually start to see patterns. You realize that there are certain homes that are located quite close to bodies of water. You look at how some homes are in very dangerous positions where they are close to banks, they are close to other bodies of water as well. So you see all of this and then you realize that this is how it played out, but you only really get that sense when you're up in the air and you're flying over these places. So to start in the north, we flew over Mdloti. That was an area that was on social media yesterday. One of the first areas, in fact, where videos started circulating showing water flowing through the basement of some of the properties, showing sand filling up in the parking lots in front. And we saw that there was a real fear from residents that lived there about what was going to happen. That community is right up against the sea. They are on the coast. It's a coastal town that's there, a little one with restaurants and holiday homes, quite a prime property really. And there we realized what had gone wrong. There were two severe cracks, two fissures in the bank on which these homes and these apartments were built on. And at those points, you see that the buildings on the sides of them have severe damage. Parts of them have collapsed, really now calling into question the integrity of all of the structures around it. The roads in front of those buildings are almost impassable. It runs right along the coast. And that area had to be evacuated yesterday. That was a lot of work for the disaster management teams that were working out in that area. A massive operation was conducted, but fortunately they managed to get through most of that. But I think a bigger area of concern was when we went out near Umzinyathi. That was where we saw that there were certain settlements that were quite close to the river there. And those ones were some completely submerged. There were vehicles that were abandoned. Now, mind you, that's something that we've been seeing throughout the city from last night. People were leaving their cars abandoned. It reminded me a lot of the unrest and how people had just parked their vehicles because roads were impassable. And that's what we saw yesterday. Some of them water damaged, others that had fender benders. We saw accidents happening in front of us last night. And today we saw the aftermath of that. We saw the vehicles that was parked off, that were stranded, and as a result of that, many people, Shahan, because of these mudslides that we saw, many people are missing. There's no easy way to give you a number on that. Yeah, these teams are still working. They're getting reports. Families are coming forward and saying they haven't seen a loved one since yesterday. In other cases, they're coming forward and saying that this person is now being accounted for. And I think most tragically, these rescuers have been sharing stories with me about how they've been finding children. And I saw those areas today as we flew over, the areas where they had recovered young children on the north coast. They were kids as young as 2 weeks old, newborn babies, 4 years old, 7 years old. These were some of the children that were either found under rubble or had been washed away in vehicles with their parents or grandparents. And this had become now the task of these rescuers or these search and rescue teams to recover those bodies. And we saw why it had turned out like that and the damage that was caused by the mud or the banks that were adjacent to the roads. If we're talking about that area, Shahan, we're looking at the two main routes, the N2 and the M4, which run almost parallel to each other, the M4 being an older route to get you to areas like past Tlanga to Belito and Mhlali and so on. And so that bridge, the M4 bridge in particular, was actually bowing. It's got a crack at the center. It looks like it's going to give way at any point. It's not safe to travel on. It's been cordoned off. If I had to take you all the way down to the south, there's a bigger problem. There's a second disaster looming because of all of the looting that's taking place there. That is a massive problem on its own. And we spent some time in the air there above Mlazi. and we saw that there were containers that were strewn all across the highway. And those were from the port, the container terminal, from some of the industries that are around there. I mean, there's Toyota down there, SA Breweries is down there as well, some other companies as well. And all of those properties are submerged in water. And we saw communities coming out from, presumably from neighboring Umlazi or maybe from further away. And there were some people that were gathered there that were actually swimming through that water or trying to get through that water to get to those containers that were lying there in that water. It was really a shocking sight. You would imagine that emergency services and disaster management teams are already stretched to the limit. So they can't really police these cases in that way. So while they are attending to other incidents, you've got some communities, some residents, again, probably coming from anywhere, maybe from the neighboring communities or beyond, and trying to get into these containers. Really disturbing scenes, Shahan.
Yeah, and that's very worrying. But, I mean, this, of course, is a situation where you're going to see people who are desperate, and I'm not saying we should condone that behavior, but I guess we're going to have to accept the reality of it happening. Just if we can focus on the rescue operations, Dasen, because obviously you were out since last night. There's only so much emergency services and disaster management teams can do. Like we saw in the visuals earlier of those houses that are basically hanging in the balance. Those families have had to move. Families in low-lying areas, especially informal settlements, have also had to be evacuated from their homes. What happens with them, and what happens with the rescue mission that's currently underway?
Well, those are two significant issues that we're dealing with. One is the evacuation. Look, it's easy when you have lots of money in your pocket, right? You can probably get accommodation elsewhere, you can move out, you can find a better place to live. Not so easy when you don't have that luxury and you built your home on a floodplain because you were either desperate for housing or you had nowhere else to live. So when these types of things happen and your home collapses, you don't have anywhere else to go. Yes, the municipality does provide certain venues during times like this. They provide community halls and other facilities for people to move into. But lots of moving parts here, people leaving belongings behind, stuff that they have worked at getting for many years. They lose ID documents. There are all these other implications of their homes being flooded. That's not even talking about the loss of their loved ones. So you've got that process going on the one hand. On the other hand, you've got these rescue workers really moving from place to place, not being able to reach every particular incident that takes place, because it's not a case of just popping in here and spending 5 minutes and leaving. These are very involved processes. It takes more than one role player. It takes police. It takes the communities. It takes private security companies, lots of individuals that are involved here. And that's what was happening last night. I mean, just this morning, Shahan, I think when it really hit home for me was when I went to Verulam. And in Verulam, I spoke to a gentleman there who told me that he, in his words, missed almost certain death by 3 seconds. He said it took really 3 seconds. In the time that he ran out of this back room that crashed, that was when he got to safety, but the two people that he was staying with died. They are under that rubble that's there where the room used to be, and they haven't been removed yet. It's a day later, and he alleges that the police officers that attended said to him, look, we'll only come back when you show us that you could at least see some parts of their bodies, because you would have to remove the rubble because we are that busy and we have so many other places to attend to. I mean, it's really a horrible thought, but it hit home. It almost spoke to how busy these individuals are. It's at a point now where they're having to look at calling in extra resources. I heard today that Rescue SA, you would know them, they have a team on standby. They normally respond to disasters out of the country as well as within the country. They are making their way into Durban, and I was told that they should be here by midnight to bolster these rescue operations that are currently taking place.
Yeah, and just lastly, in terms of the figure we were given by the Premier, at least 45 people confirmed dead, but that number, of course, is expected to rise quite sharply given the magnitude of this devastation you're showing us and speaking of.
I think that's a very modest estimate, and I don't blame authorities at this point because they are collating information, they're getting different sources. But I can tell you personally, and I can speak for the rescuers, the police officers, and the people that I know and trust that I've spoken to on the ground. And some of them tell me and have told me that individually they have counted 8 deaths. In another area, there's been 12 that they know of. And if I'm just looking at a small circle of people that I know that are working in different areas, it tells me that that number that we have right now is probably a very preliminary number. And the expectation is that it will rise as the waters subside. And that's the sad part here, that you're really only starting to get the true extent of what happened last night now as daylight hit and as those waters start to recede a little bit. But look, even that's going to take a long while. We've got the N2 still completely flooded down there on the south side of Durban. You've got other areas where cars and houses are still submerged. So it will take a few days, and unfortunately, we are going to see higher numbers.
Yeah, and just lastly, if you have any information, I believe there's an emergency meeting currently underway. Officials in Durban are trying to just map out how they're going to respond to this disaster. Any word on that?
I haven't received an independent confirmation, Shahan, but I can tell you the necessity of that, because the city at this point is broken, and that's not an exaggeration. The road network is severed in places. You've got the public transport system that has suffered. There are properties that are submerged. You've got clinics that are closed. You've got schools that are damaged. You've got electricity problems beyond the load shedding that we normally deal with. So there is a lot going on here. And if an emergency meeting is happening now, I believe that it should have happened a long time ago, because this certainly was an emergency already last night.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. We'll touch base with you as soon as you arrive at the next destination. Our senior reporter, Dasen Thathiah, is on the ground in KwaZulu Natal.